Hello, everyone. Welcome. I am Charlie, seasoned fundraiser, host, and producer of Fixing the Philanthropic Flow, a series powered by IG Advisors where we speak with fundraising and grant making activists who inspire us. Harriet?
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. This is my first Fixing the Philanthropic Flow session. I'm so happy to be here with Afua. So I'm Harriet. I'm an advisor at IG. I've been working there for a couple of years. And I'm a seasoned grant maker turned resource activist.
Amazing. And at IG Advisors, we work with the philanthropy, business, and not-for-profit sectors to bring about social and environmental change. And today we are speaking with Afua, one of our amazing Fix the Flow fellows. Afua, could you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your journey with fundraising and or grant making and your kind of role in those spaces?
Thanks, Charlie, and good to be here. I am Afua Gyapomaa, and I work with the African Women's Development Fund as the Partnerships and Philanthropy Officer. And so I began this journey probably a decade ago when I joined the development space and working in this space. I think one thing that I've noted over the years is how the traditional philanthropy system often excludes the groups that we aim to serve. So, for example, you have many community organizations, especially those that are led by young women. In our case, AWDF works in the African region. But then we realize that the French-speaking African countries are often excluded due to barriers in language and lack of formal structures or rigid donor requirements. Despite these new funding commitments over the years where donors we hear them talking about giving more resources to women's rights organizations. Research by AWDF shows us that there's only less than 1% of official development assistance that goes to gender-related aid. And that is a concern. And it's also a bit frustrating when you see how funders' priorities sometimes overshadow the lived realities of the communities we serve. Therefore, advocating for philanthropy that trusts local language, local knowledge, and centers feminist values and shares power, I think it's a key thing to do. And so my role at AWDF involves raising funds and cultivating partnerships that challenge that status quo, whether by building relationships with funders who share our vision or advocating for practices that value accountability without imposing excessive burdens on our grantee partners. Because oftentimes when you have rigid requirements, these poses a lot of challenges, and a lot of organizations are unable to access resources that are meant to do a lot good to the community. And so I see the philanthropic ecosystem that doesn't just perpetuate power, but redistributes it, where organizations like AWDF, we can co-create solutions with our partners rather than adapting to structures that don't fit the realities on the ground. And I must say that being part of the fellowship, the Fix the Flow Fellowship by IG, has been a wonderful experience because it has provided a platform for me to meet and network with diverse professionals that are working globally on the issues that, we all converge to address, looking at how we can change the status quo, how we challenge it, and how we strategize, to address the things that doesn't make the system work best for us.
I've actually had the privilege of working quite closely with Afua over the last few months and can categorically say that you are a resource activist. You really do embody all of the values of that role. And I think it's really interesting what you were saying about And we're hearing a lot about the role of intermediaries in this space as well, and how organizations like AWDF play that really important role in influencing other donors as well.
Yeah.
So just want to also, one up that. And Afua has actually written about this as well. You've got a Alliance article out, don't you, about your reflections from a conference that you went to recently. So definitely check that out as well. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing your story. Really fascinating. And so moving on to our next section, which is about resource activism. So our Fix the Flow Fellowship, which you've obviously just spoken about, is a movement of what we call resource activists. So Afua, what led you to making that shift from just playing the game, playing that fundraising and grant making game, to really wanting to change the game and actually change how the funding system works?
Right. So I think it's as a result of seeing the challenges I alluded to earlier, where you have funding not going to where the resources are needed most. I talked about the fact that there's only less than 1% of official development assistance that is allocated for gender-related aid. And most of this funding, when you talk about Global South, I mean, it's even less. And so the idea of changing that narrative and making that shift, I think that is what has brought me here. And Charlie, you just said what AWDF does. And so what we are doing over the years is also trying to be in spaces where we can also influence donors to make them understand that funding these causes are very, very meaningful and useful. And so the need for them to allocate more resources towards the work that we do will be very helpful, not just for their cause, but I mean for society as a whole, because that is what philanthropy is all about, giving to change the things that people are going through daily. So if there are hardships, how can you support? And so supporting in areas like gender-based violence, which has escalated over the years. After COVID, we see a lot of issues coming up, and talking about Africa in our context, we talk about the female genital mutilation. There are a whole lot of issues that philanthropy can address. And so having to work in the space where we can move more resources towards the work we're doing, I think that is one key thing that influenced me to be in this space.
Yeah, amazing. That's so powerful. And as a resource activist, what would you say is your superpower?
I would say probably that's my ability to connect the dots, to see the big picture while paying attention to the nuances that make partnerships and movements thrive, taking a step back, understanding how different elements of the ecosystem, the funders, grantees, the policies, the infrastructure, the social movement, how all these interact and influence one another. I think that might be my superpower. And
It sounds like it.
So in the context of our work, looking at how we work in the French-speaking African countries, where language barriers and systemic underfunding have created distinct obstacles for the regional organizations, they need to understand the unique context in which these organizations operate and the challenges they face, the cultural and linguistic, the historical, everything comes to play. And so this allows us to advocate for solutions that address these. And so I'm in that space where I'm able to mobilize resources that can facilitate the work that we do to enable these organizations do their work better. So yeah, the superpower is being able to connect the dots, understanding the context and the work in which we work, the area in which we work.
Yeah, it sounds like you're a great strategic thinker, communicator, influencer, all of these things that you need to be a true resource activist.
Yeah.
And what about your kryptonite? So what most holds you back from creating the change you want to see?
The So I would say that's the systemic inertia, the entrenched ways of working in philanthropy, the bureaucratic processes, the donor-driven priorities, ever-present pressure to meet targets, outcomes, because in a transformative work, this can be quite challenging, where you're seeking, for instance, to address behavioral change. It takes quite a long time. And so if you're working within specific time frames, that inhibits the work that you do, and the emotional toil of also navigating the power dynamics and advocating for change in spaces where resistance to equity and inclusivity still exist. And so where there aren't any enabling policies, and we see that happening in the continent where there's shrinking civic space, a lot of policies coming up that doesn't make the operations of civil societies and non-governmental organizations operate freely. And so I think that is a weight. And what holds me back most, though, is also the slow pace of change. As I said earlier, a lot is being done, but a lot more needs to be done. When you read reports and they tell you that gender equity is going to take like 50 years, and if we are still marking time, then we need to do more. And so the slow pace of change in terms of behavioral policies, systems, there's this constant tension also between wanting to push the boundaries and recognizing that the change takes a lot of time, takes trust, it takes persistence. And so you need not give up. And so every step forward, every conversation we are having, and even new partnerships that we do always brings us closer to the desired change. And so there is a lot of hope. And I believe that even as the work feels overwhelming, there is hope. So we need to just push. Yeah.
I love that message. There is hope. I
Yeah.
love that. And I always see the tension with philanthropy between we know that change takes time. It's a long-term thing. It's not linear. It goes up and down, round and round. But in philanthropy, we think so short-term, and we're just looking at measuring the next year and two, and actually things take longer than. So completely agree there.
Yeah, and I love that you brought out so many intersecting forces and dynamics and kind of feelings that this work brings up as well, and the need to think about things in this ecosystem way to really achieve the transformational type of change that you were talking about. And I think that your piece that Harriet spoke to earlier in Alliance really talks about the stuff beyond funders looking at impact and the kind of bureaucratic things that you spoke to, and really focuses on the value side of things and how important that is. And you speak to, the crucialness of integrating values like transparency, inclusivity, and really an awareness of the history of colonialism that is so present in philanthropy, and the inherent power dynamics that are so entrenched in the way that philanthropy works. And I wonder if you could share some specific steps that you've taken. You mentioned being in spaces where you can really influence those working in philanthropy to adopt these values and ways of thinking in their strategic approach. I wonder if there's any other specific steps or ways in which others can really adopt this resource activist, values aligned approach to philanthropy that you would be able to share with those listening.
Right. Thanks. And so I answered this question from the angle of what AWDF is doing. We have taken deliberate steps to challenge some of these norms and go beyond the conventional methods of moving money, and also addressing the issues that our grantee partners have. And so, for example, we are simplifying our application processes, particularly for emerging groups in marginalized or underfunded areas. We have been doing this over the years, but we want to do more of it. where we provide more multi-year unrestricted funding whenever possible. But then the challenge is we can only give this multi-year unrestricted funding when we get multi-year unrestricted funding to give to our grantee partners. And so we are in spaces where we are influencing philanthropy and donors to provide this level of flexibility to enable us also do that. And AWDF is not doing this alone. So we are working with, networks such as Prospera, leading from the South, because we believe that having a voice, collective voice that speaks to issues works best than, going as an organization alone in these spaces. And so we are doing a lot more of that where we would want to influence the donor community to provide more funding that address the need. Because I talked earlier on about how we make changes. You can't have a 2-year project that can impact behavioral change, like influence behavioral change. You probably need a long-term project, 5 years and beyond. And so if you are getting 2 years funding, how do you then provide funding for organizations that want to address systemic changes in 2 years? It's not going to be possible. So this is what we're doing differently at AWDF, following from the conversations that we had in Zimbabwe on the 5th African Philanthropy Conference. And it also means that we have to engage in honest conversations with funders about the need to trust African women-led organizations and movements, and pushing back on practices that enforce inequalities and equities in the system. So, and I think you talked about adopting a resource activism mindset. Probably we need to continue examining the power in the ecosystem, who decides where resources go, who shapes the narratives, and then we need to take back a step and see, how do we redistribute the power, and how do we redistribute the resources to facilitate development or, social justice.
Amazing. Thank you so much. There's so many, you're doing such incredible work, and there's so many really great insights from, you spoke to a lot of tangible, actionable things that people can look into doing now to make those smaller steps towards that transformational change that we're hoping to see. Spoke about the long-term thinking that needs to be done and the collaborative element of this work, which is so, so important, as you spoke to, so powerful. So thank you so much for sharing all of that. And I want to bring us up to a more dream visionary level of the future philanthropic system. As we speak about often on the Fix the Flow Fellowship, we don't just talk about the many, many ways that the funding system doesn't work for us, but we do try to collectively imagine a kind of guiding star for what an ideal utopian funding system would look like. So I'm really interested to hear from you. You've pointed to a few things already, but in your ideal utopian world, what are the top 3 qualities of your ideal philanthropic funding system?
Top 3, right. I would say that the philanthropic funding system should embody equity, flexibility, and collaboration as the core qualities. These are the top 3 for me because equity seeks to prioritize the redistribution of power and resources to those who have historically been excluded or marginalized. And then it would mean that we would center the leadership of communities and ensure that decision-making lies in those most affected by the issues at hand. Is by acknowledging that we would also address, and then philanthropy can commit to dismantling these systems that perpetuate inequality. And so equity is key. And flexibility, because it recognizes that transformative change doesn't happen within rigid frameworks, like a logic frame, input, output, outcomes, goals, a whole lot of things interplay to lead to transformative change in the work that we do. And so offering unrestricted multi-year funding to allow organizations to set the agendas and adapt to the evolving needs would help. AWDF has done this very well by listening to what the movement needs, by being agile, and we're saying that, okay, we're not even going to box our funding into themes, so organizations can apply to us based on the issues that they want to address. I think having that flexibility and also having the resources to move around when things change is the right way to go. Yeah. And I was talking about partnership and relationship and collaboration. Yeah, so an ideal system that fosters genuine collaboration between funders, grantees, and communities. What do we really want to achieve? And at the end of the day, I think there's the need for that discussion for these partners to know what we want to do, because whose interest really are we serving? Is it that of the philanthropists, or is it that of the community or the intermediaries, the one who receives the funding to do the work on behalf of the grantee partners and communities? And so there's the need to have that kind of relationship to understand each other and know that we need to do this, co-create the funding strategies, listen to the feedback from communities, align their efforts across the ecosystem, because this can only amplify the impact that we want to do. And creating spaces for shared learning where funders and grantee partners are engaging as equals. And then we can innovate together because it's for the good of all of us.
Oh, so we have equity, flexibility, and collaboration. That's
it.
a funding system I want to be part of. So I'm sure our listeners will agree with you on that. Thank you for describing that so just so clearly as well, and giving like really kind of practical examples of what that actually means. So we're obviously building a movement for change, but for those listeners who aren't part of the movement just yet, hopefully they will be soon, and those who want to really be able to take action right now in their day-to-day, what do you think they can start with? So those grant makers and fundraisers, what are kind of practical steps that they can start with to start creating this fair system that you've just outlined?
I think it should be a fair funding system that starts with recognizing that the current system often reflects and reinforces power imbalances. And so how do we do that? By actively listening to people and organizations that we serve. We can do that because those are the people that we are going to serve anyway. And so there's the need to listen, engage in conversations, to understand their needs, the challenges, aspirations, without imposing any preconceived solutions. So you can't go into a community and take, for instance, you want to do a borehole. You just go and then you start digging a borehole. Is it the right place? What do the people really need? Is that a priority? And so they need to understand, have conversations and understand, and then center their voices in the decision-making processes, trying to understand the historical social context in which they operate. Yeah, I think that is a good way to start. And
so actively listening.
Actively listening, yeah.
I love that.
And being part of the ecosystem, because you need to understand the movement and what they need before you can make any meaningful change.
Yeah, such a great place to start. And I think that we should all be able to do that. So thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your wonderful, wonderful insights and experiences and journey. And thanks to everyone else for watching. Please do stay tuned for more episodes. If you enjoyed today's video, please like, comment, subscribe, and share with any fundraiser or grant maker in your life who you think might need a little bit of sparkle in their journey. And you can also click the link in the description below to join our next cohort of wonderful fellows like Afua on the Fix the Flow Fellowship, because together we can fix the flow of resources for good.